The morning sun cast long shadows across the courtyard of Buckingham Palace as tourists gathered behind the ornate iron gates. Among them stood Marcus Wellington, a wealthy businessman from New York who had made his fortune in real estate. His designer suit, expensive watch, and air of superiority made him stand out from the crowd of excited visitors taking photographs and marveling at the grandeur before them. Marcus had arrived in London 3 days earlier for what he called a European conquest tour. He owned several luxury hotels across America and was considering expanding his empire to Europe. However, this wasn't just a business trip for Marcus. He had a particular disdain for what he saw as outdated traditions and useless ceremonies. The British monarchy, in his opinion, was nothing more than an expensive tourist attraction that served no real purpose in the modern world. Standing beside him was his personal assistant, Jennifer, a young woman who had learned to navigate Marcus's unpredictable moods and controversial opinions. She watched nervously as her boss's face grew increasingly annoyed with each passing minute. The crowd was getting larger, and Marcus didn't like being surrounded by what he called common tourists. "This is ridiculous," Marcus muttered, checking his gold Rolex. "We've been standing here for 20 minutes just to see some guy in a funny hat march back and forth. In America, we don't waste time on this kind of nonsense." Jennifer tried to calm him down. "Sir, the changing of the guard is a historic tradition that dates back centuries. Many people travel from around the world just to witness this ceremony." Marcus scoffed loudly, causing several nearby tourists to turn and look at him. "Historic tradition? It's a waste of taxpayer money. These guards are just fancy dress-up dolls. They don't actually protect anything important." The ceremony was about to begin, and the crowd pressed forward slightly to get a better view. Marcus felt someone accidentally bump into him from behind, which only added to his growing irritation. He had specifically requested a VIP viewing experience through his hotel concierge, but apparently even money couldn't buy him a better position than standing with the regular crowd. As the guards began their ceremonial march, their red uniforms pristine and their movements precise, Marcus's commentary grew louder and more disrespectful. "Look at them," he said to Jennifer, but his voice carried to those around him. "Playing dress-up like children. In New York, our security guards actually do something useful." An elderly British gentleman standing nearby turned to Marcus with a disapproving look. "Excuse me, sir, but these guards are highly trained soldiers who have served their country with honor. Perhaps you should show some respect." Marcus turned to face the man, his face flushed with anger. "Respect? For what? This whole monarchy thing is just an expensive circus. Your queen sits in her palace while regular people struggle to pay their bills. At least in America, we got rid of kings and queens centuries ago." The elderly man's wife gently pulled her husband away, not wanting to cause a scene, but Marcus's voice had attracted more attention. Other tourists were beginning to stare, some looking embarrassed by his behavior, others appearing genuinely offended by his disrespectful comments. Jennifer tugged at Marcus's sleeve. "Sir, perhaps we should lower our voices. People are starting to stare." But Marcus was beyond caring about social courtesy. He had built his fortune by being bold and speaking his mind, and he wasn't about to change his approach just because he was in a foreign country. "Let them stare," he said loudly. "Someone needs to tell these people the truth about their outdated system." As the guards continued their ceremony, one particular guard caught Marcus's attention. The young man stood perfectly still at his post, his face expressionless beneath the tall black bearskin hat. His red uniform was immaculate, his posture perfect, and his dedication to maintaining his position was absolute, despite the growing commotion in the crowd. Marcus pointed directly at the guard. "Look at that one," he said to Jennifer, his voice carrying across the courtyard. "Standing there like a statue. What's the point? He's not protecting anything. He's just standing there looking pretty for the tourists." The guard, whose name was William Hayes, had been serving in the Queen's Guard for 3 years. He was a decorated soldier who had completed 2 tours of duty in Afghanistan before being selected for this prestigious posting. William had grown accustomed to tourists making comments and taking photos, but he had never encountered someone quite as disrespectful as Marcus Wellington. As Marcus continued his loud criticism, comparing the guards to museum pieces and overpaid actors, William remained perfectly still. His training had taught him to ignore distractions and maintain his composure regardless of the circumstances. However, he couldn't help but notice how Marcus's behavior was affecting the other visitors, particularly some children who had come to see the ceremony with their families. The situation was about to escalate in a way that no one, including Marcus himself, could have predicted. His wealth and success had always allowed him to say whatever he wanted without consequences. But he was about to learn that some lines should never be crossed, regardless of how much money someone has in their bank account. Marcus pulled out his expensive smartphone and began recording the guards, making mocking commentary for what he planned to post on his social media accounts. "Wait until my followers see this," he said with a cruel laugh. "British taxpayers paying for grown men to play dress-up." The stage was set for a confrontation that would soon make headlines around the world. The ceremony continued as Marcus became increasingly agitated by what he saw as a pointless display. He had finished recording his mocking video and was now focused entirely on guard William Hayes, who remained motionless at his post. Marcus's behavior had drawn disapproving looks from nearly everyone around him, but he seemed to feed off the negative attention. "Jennifer, watch this," Marcus said with a smirk. "I'm going to prove to everyone how ridiculous this whole thing is." Jennifer's face went pale as she realized what her boss might be planning. "Sir, please don't do anything rash. We're guests in this country, and we should show respect for their customs." But Marcus had already made up his mind. He had spent his entire life believing that money and status gave him the right to do whatever he wanted, wherever he wanted. In his mind, these guards were nothing more than paid performers, and he was about to expose what he saw as the fraud of British tradition. Marcus pushed through the crowd, ignoring the protests of other tourists as he made his way closer to the palace gates. Several people tried to stop him, warning him that approaching the guards was strictly forbidden, but Marcus brushed off their concerns with his usual arrogance. "Excuse me, sir, you can't go beyond this point," called out a police officer who had noticed Marcus's movement toward the restricted area. Marcus turned to the officer with his most condescending smile. "Officer, I'm Marcus Wellington from Wellington Hotels in New York. I'm sure we can work something out." He reached for his wallet, assuming that money would solve any problem, as it always had in the past. The police officer stepped forward, his expression serious. "Sir, I don't care who you are or where you're from. These barriers are here for everyone's safety, and you need to step back immediately." This response only fueled Marcus's anger. He wasn't used to being told what he couldn't do, especially by someone he viewed as beneath his social status. "Do you know how much money I spend when I travel? Do you realize how many jobs I create? I just want to get a closer look at your little toy soldier here." The crowd behind him began to murmur with increasing disapproval. Parents were pulling their children away from the scene, and several tourists started recording the confrontation with their phones. Marcus, however, was too focused on his target to notice the growing attention. William Hayes, the guard who had become the focus of Marcus's attention, continued to stand perfectly still. His years of military training had prepared him for many situations, but dealing with an entitled tourist who seemed determined to cause trouble was testing his patience in ways that combat never had. Marcus managed to slip past the police officer during a moment of distraction and found himself just a few feet away from William. The guard's impressive stature and unwavering gaze should have been enough to deter most people, but Marcus saw only what he considered to be a man playing dress-up. "Hey there, toy soldier! Marcus called out loudly, causing everyone in the vicinity to freeze in shock. "How much do they pay you to stand there and look pretty? I bet I make more money in a day than you make in a year." William's jaw tightened slightly, but he maintained his professional composure. His training had taught him to ignore provocations and maintain his post regardless of distractions. However, Marcus was about to cross a line that would test every ounce of William's self-control. "What's the matter? Cat got your tongue?" Marcus taunted, stepping even closer. "Or are you not allowed to talk to us regular people? Maybe you need permission from your queen first." Jennifer had finally caught up to her boss and was desperately trying to pull him away from the situation. "Mr. Wellington, please, we need to leave right now. This isn't appropriate behavior." But Marcus was enjoying the attention and the power he felt over the silent guard. He had always been someone who pushed boundaries, and this situation seemed like the perfect opportunity to prove his superiority over what he saw as an outdated system. "You know what I think?" Marcus announced loudly to the crowd that had gathered to watch the spectacle. "I think these guards are all show and no substance. They can't even defend themselves against one American businessman." The crowd's disapproval was becoming more vocal. Several people were shouting at Marcus to leave the guard alone, while others were calling for police intervention. Children were crying, confused by the angry man who was ruining their special day out. Marcus reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a large wad of cash. He began waving it in front of William's face, taunting him with the money. "Here's what real power looks like, soldier boy. This is more cash than you'll see in months. But you can't even move to take it, can you? Because you're not really a guard, you're just a statue." William's training was being pushed to its absolute limit. Every instinct told him to respond to this disrespectful behavior, but his duty required him to maintain his position and his composure. The sweat beginning to form on his forehead was the only indication of the internal struggle he was experiencing. The situation reached its breaking point when Marcus, frustrated by William's lack of response, decided to escalate his behavior in the most disrespectful way imaginable. He gathered saliva in his mouth and, with deliberate malice, spat directly at William's face. The glob of spit hit William squarely on his left cheek and began to slowly drip down toward his uniform. The crowd gasped in collective horror at this ultimate act of disrespect. Even Marcus's assistant, Jennifer, covered her mouth in shock, unable to believe what her boss had just done. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. William Hayes, a decorated soldier who had served his country with honor and distinction, stood with spit running down his face while a wealthy American tourist laughed at his humiliation. The crowd waited in tense silence, wondering how this unprecedented situation would unfold. Marcus stepped back with a satisfied grin, confident that he had proven his point about the ineffectiveness of the British Guards. He had no idea that his actions had just set in motion a response that would change his life forever and become a lesson in respect that he would never forget. The silence that followed Marcus's despicable act seemed to stretch on forever. William Hayes stood perfectly still, the spit slowly making its way down his cheek as hundreds of witnesses watched in stunned disbelief. Marcus, meanwhile, was basking in what he believed was his moment of triumph, completely unaware that he had just committed one of the most serious offenses possible against a member of the Queen's Guard. What Marcus didn't understand was that spitting on a royal guard wasn't just a personal insult. It was an attack on the crown itself. The guards weren't just ceremonial figures. They were active duty soldiers with full legal authority to protect themselves and the royal family. William Hayes had the training and the right to respond, but his response would be measured, professional, and devastating in its precision. William slowly turned his head to look directly at Marcus for the first time. His eyes, cold and steel gray, met Marcus's gaze with an intensity that immediately wiped the smirk off the wealthy tourist's face. Without breaking eye contact, William reached up with his white-gloved hand and calmly wiped the spit from his cheek. "Sir, William said in a voice that carried clearly across the courtyard, his tone perfectly controlled but unmistakably authoritative. "You have just committed assault on a member of Her Majesty's Guard. You are under arrest." The crowd erupted in a mixture of gasps and applause as William stepped down from his post for the first time during the entire ceremony. Marcus's face went from smug satisfaction to confusion, and then to panic, as he realized that the toy soldier he had just humiliated was very much a real soldier with real authority. "Wait, what? You can't arrest me!" Marcus sputtered, his confidence crumbling as William approached him with measured steps. "I'm an American citizen. I have diplomatic immunity. I'm a businessman worth millions of dollars." William's response was as calm as it was devastating. "Sir, assault is assault regardless of your nationality or your wealth. You have attacked a representative of the British Crown, and you will face the consequences of your actions." By this time, several other guards had appeared, moving with the kind of coordinated precision that only comes from extensive military training. Marcus suddenly realized that these weren't just men in costumes. They were professional soldiers who took their duty very seriously. "This is ridiculous," Marcus shouted, his voice now high-pitched with panic. "Jennifer, call the embassy! Call my lawyers! These people can't treat me like this!" But Jennifer was nowhere to be seen. The moment Marcus had spat at the guard, she had quietly distanced herself from her employer, horrified by his behavior and wanting no part in the consequences that were sure to follow. The police officers who had been trying to maintain order throughout Marcus's outburst now stepped forward to assist the guards. One of them, Inspector Sarah Mitchell, had been watching the situation unfold with growing concern. She had dealt with difficult tourists before, but never had she witnessed such a blatant act of disrespect toward the Royal Guard. "Mr. Wellington," Inspector Mitchell said, reading from the identification she had confiscated from Marcus's wallet, "You are being arrested for assault on a member of the Queen's Guard, disturbing the peace, and disorderly conduct. You have the right to remain silent, but anything you do say may be taken down and used in evidence against you." Marcus couldn't believe what was happening. In his mind, he was still the powerful businessman who could buy his way out of any situation. "Do you people have any idea who I am? I own hotels worth hundreds of millions of dollars. I employ thousands of people. You can't treat me like some common criminal." William Hayes, who had returned to his post but was now officially off duty following the assault, stepped forward once again. The crowd had grown larger as news of the incident spread, and people were taking photos and videos that would soon be shared around the world. "Mr. Wellington," William said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had commanded troops in combat, "your wealth means nothing here. Your status means nothing here. What matters is respect, honor, and basic human decency, qualities that your money apparently cannot buy." The crowd erupted in applause at William's words. Tourists who had traveled from around the world to witness British tradition were cheering for the guard who had stood his ground against an entitled bully. Children who had been frightened by Marcus's earlier behavior were now clapping excitedly, understanding that the good guy had won. As the police led Marcus away in handcuffs, he continued to shout about his rights and his wealth. "This is international news. Do you understand what this will do to British tourism? People will hear about how you treat visitors here." Inspector Mitchell smiled grimly as she walked beside the handcuffed businessman. "Mr. Wellington, you're absolutely right about this becoming international news, but I don't think the story is going to paint you in the light you expect." Indeed, several journalists had already arrived on the scene, having been alerted by the crowd of tourists who had witnessed the incident. The story of the wealthy American who had spat at a royal guard and received a swift lesson in justice was exactly the kind of tale that would capture the public's imagination. As Marcus was placed in the back of a police car, he caught sight of William Hayes, who had resumed his ceremonial duties but now stood as a symbol of dignity and professionalism in the face of disrespect. The guard's uniform was once again immaculate, his posture perfect, and his dedication unwavering. But Marcus would soon learn that his troubles were just beginning. What he had thought would be a minor inconvenience that his money and influence could easily resolve was about to become a legal and public relations nightmare that would follow him for the rest of his life. The car doors slammed shut, and Marcus Wellington, for the first time in his privileged life, found himself completely powerless. No amount of money, no network of influential contacts, and no amount of shouting about his importance would change the fact that he had crossed a line that should never have been crossed. The consequences of his actions were about to unfold in ways he could never have imagined. The news of Marcus Wellington's arrest spread faster than wildfire in the age of social media. Within hours, videos of the incident had been uploaded to every major platform, complete with hashtags like "Respect the Guard" and "Wealth Can't Buy Class." The story dominated international headlines, but not in the way Marcus had predicted. Sitting in a holding cell at the local police station, Marcus finally had time to reflect on the magnitude of his mistake. The cold reality of his situation was beginning to sink in as he waited for his lawyer to arrive from New York. For the first time in decades, his money and status couldn't immediately solve his problems. The British legal system, as Marcus was about to learn, takes assault on the Queen's Guard very seriously. The charge carried potential penalties that included not only substantial fines, but also the possibility of imprisonment and a permanent ban from entering the United Kingdom. For someone whose business empire depended on international travel and reputation, these consequences were catastrophic. His lawyer, Richard Pembroke, finally arrived the next morning after taking an emergency flight from New York. Richard had been handling Marcus's legal affairs for 15 years and had never seen his client in such a serious predicament. The usually confident businessman looked haggard and defeated as they met in the consultation room. "Marcus, what were you thinking?" Richard asked, shaking his head in disbelief after reviewing the charges and watching the viral videos. "This isn't like your usual controversies. You've assaulted a representative of the British Crown in front of hundreds of witnesses, all of whom recorded the incident." Marcus tried to maintain his usual arrogance, but his voice lacked its typical confidence. "It's just spit, Richard. How much trouble can I really get into for spitting? Offer them money. Buy them a new uniform. Whatever it takes to make this go away." Richard's expression grew grave. "Marcus, you don't understand. This isn't just about spitting. Under British law, what you did constitutes assault on a crown servant. The maximum penalty is 2 years in prison, plus substantial fines. And given the international attention this case has received, they're not going to quietly let you buy your way out." The weight of his situation finally began to hit Marcus. He had built his fortune by taking risks and pushing boundaries, but he had never faced consequences that his wealth couldn't overcome. Now he was facing the possibility of actual prison time in a foreign country, along with the destruction of his carefully built reputation. Meanwhile, the public response to the incident was overwhelmingly supportive of William Hayes and critical of Marcus's behavior. Social media was filled with messages praising the guard's professionalism and condemning the wealthy tourist's disrespectful actions. A crowdfunding campaign had even been started to send William and his family on a vacation, which had already raised over £50,000 in just 24 hours. The Wellington hotel chain was also feeling the impact of their owner's behavior. Bookings were being canceled, and negative reviews were flooding their websites. Marcus's business partners were distancing themselves from him, and several major investors were demanding emergency meetings to discuss the future of their partnerships. Jennifer, his former assistant, had already submitted her resignation via email and was giving interviews to news outlets about her experience working for Marcus. Her descriptions of his entitled behavior and disrespectful attitude toward service workers painted a picture of a man who believed his wealth made him superior to everyone else. On the third day of Marcus's detention, he received an unexpected visitor. William Hayes, still in his civilian clothes, had requested permission to speak with the man who had assaulted him. Marcus was shocked to see the guard he had humiliated sitting across from him in the visitation room. "I wanted to see you in person," William said calmly, "because I think you need to understand something important." Marcus, expecting either gloating or further condemnation, was surprised by William's measured tone. "What could you possibly want to say to me?" William leaned forward slightly, his eyes serious but not unkind. "Mr. Wellington, I've served 2 tours in Afghanistan. I've seen real poverty, real suffering, and real courage. I've watched soldiers risk their lives for principles you clearly don't understand: honor, duty, and respect for others." Marcus shifted uncomfortably, unsure where this conversation was heading. "Your money," William continued, "your hotels, your success, none of that is inherently wrong. But the way you treat people, the way you believe your wealth makes you better than others, that's what led you here. You spat in my face not because I had done anything to you, but because you thought my position in life made me unworthy of basic human respect." William paused, letting his words sink in. "The irony is that you wanted to humiliate me in front of all those people, but you ended up humiliating yourself. Every video of that incident shows not a powerful businessman asserting his dominance, but a sad, entitled man who has forgotten what it means to be human." Marcus found himself unable to respond. For the first time in years, someone was speaking to him with complete honesty, without being influenced by his wealth or status. The trial, when it finally came, was swift and decisive. Marcus pleaded guilty to assault on a crown servant, hoping that his cooperation might lead to a lighter sentence. His lawyers had negotiated the best deal possible under the circumstances, but justice still had to be served. The judge, the Honorable Mrs. Justice Patricia Thornfield, delivered a sentence that would resonate around the world. Marcus was fined £50,000, sentenced to 6 months in prison with 3 months suspended, and banned from entering the United Kingdom for 5 years. Additionally, he was required to make a public apology and donate £1 million to military charities. But perhaps the most significant consequence was the complete transformation of Marcus's public image. The man who had once been featured on magazine covers as a successful entrepreneur was now known worldwide as the entitled tourist who spat at a royal guard. His business empire crumbled as partners withdrew their support and customers boycotted his hotels. William Hayes, on the other hand, became a symbol of dignity and professionalism. He received commendations from his superiors, invitations to speak at military academies, and offers for book and movie deals about his experience. Most importantly to him, he had shown that respect and honor were worth more than all the money in the world. Years later, after serving his sentence and losing most of his fortune, Marcus Wellington would write a memoir titled The Cost of Arrogance. In it, he would credit his encounter with William Hayes as the moment that finally taught him the difference between being rich and being wealthy in character. The incident at Buckingham Palace became a cautionary tale about the dangers of entitlement and the importance of treating all people with respect, regardless of their position in life. And William Hayes continued to serve with honor, knowing that sometimes the greatest victories come not from fighting back, but from standing firm in one's principles when faced with those who have forgotten their own.